yeah, of course I need to reload the sound into there because I've moved this. So we'll go to spoon drops again. Make a selection, and I need obviously to so grain transposition will be 1. Obviously I would probably send load bangs to all of these to initiate them. Again, this is good practice if you're making a patch. And we will make a grain envelope of 0.1 to 0.9 and turn up our volume, which I'm having to do independently at the moment, but we'll come back to all of that in a minute. So hopefully, so now you can hear that I can have several sounds happening on top of each other. And if I move this through the patch, again I'm not getting any clicks when I do that. Hang on, does that actually send? No, because I haven't sent my grain position out yet. So I need to. Luckily, it was running from millisecond 0 anyway. Yep, so that now works. I was bound to make a mistake, but that's again that works. And so now we just need to specify our grain interval, which we can do very simply by using a metronome object and choosing how rapidly we want bangs to be sent and counts to be made in order to trigger each of these voices. So I could, well, I'll start off with 100 milliseconds, but of course I can change that very easily. Let's put in a toggle object and a means of changing that rate. Raise that down a bit. So we are moving through the sound, and of course if I were to automate the process of reading through that sound, I would get a kind of granular timescale. You notice of course that we're hearing this before I reach the sound because our grain length is relatively long, although you can't actually see it because I could probably do with having some means of visual display there, so I was putting a float of that there so we can see how long that actually is. But we have a grain length of 433 milliseconds at the moment, so of course what we're hearing is the end of the grain there, but I can make the grain length shorter, and of course we cease to hear it until we're much closer to the sound. And I mentioned actually walking through the sound. Of course you can do that. If I were to use a line object here, actually what I should do of course is to save this, otherwise it's going to crash and I'm going to lose it all. Grain generator, you can see I've made some versions here, but I shall call this tutorial 1. Except that I shouldn't have put it there because of course my voice patch that I changed was in this folder, so I shall have to make it again in there. Yeah, so you could use a line object very simply to read through that data, as long as we know how long it is, which if you remember it happened, I just happened to know that it was about 14 seconds long, that sound. We did find that out earlier. Or of course I could find it out properly by sending a bang into there and then having the output, the total time, going into a number box just to tell me. but I know it's roughly 14 seconds long, so I can say read from 0 to 14. Is that right? 14 seconds into the file over a period of I don't know, let's say 40 seconds. And I can get Line to do that for me. And we get a granular time stretch. And of course, by changing the grain length, notice incidentally, I'll have to change this in a minute, notice that we're getting a kind of transposition when I change the grain length, just temporarily while I'm changing it. Actually, we probably wouldn't want that, so let's see if we can deal with that for a minute. So why are we getting that transposition happening? Well, it's because we are changing, when we're changing this grain length here, we are changing where the file is reading to, or where the grain is reading to over the period that we've specified, and so it's having to change its rate and in relation to how far it's got to read, and so it will change the pitch of that. And of course it's happening every time we move, because we're not keeping that that rate constant throughout the course of the grain. So really what we want to do is to only have this grain length sent at the outset of the grain, or at least sorry, at the triggering of the grain, and not have it updated throughout the course of the grain. So what we'll do in order to do that is within the voice abstraction. So what we need to do is use the integer object again. So although the grain length will always be sent to the voices, even whenever it's changed, it will only be triggered when, let's pop this down here, when the grain is actually triggered. I hope that makes sense. So it's not going to be updated dynamically. It's going to be only updated at the triggering of each grain. So that should sort that one out. Let's just check. So I'll save this and go back to here, and we'll need to resend some of that data again. So wiggle the grain length, wiggle the transposition, and hopefully I can move back here. Actually, I'll re-trigger this line event again, and now if I move the grain, of course we've got a blank now. But we're not getting that transposition anymore. So hopefully that makes sense. And what we could do, of course, now is to clean the patch up a little bit. So I'll do that quickly. And of course we've now got the grain interval, so I can now pull this up to here. So we've got all the parameters that we initially started off with. Now we don't really need to see all of those voices, so I can actually get rid of, or at least hide, all of this stuff. And I'm going to use the encapsulate function. Oops, not in there, sorry. In the edit menu, go to encapsulate, and it'll just make us a single patcher, which we can call voices. I could make a kind of master gain control, because these ones, if you remember earlier, I had to move them independently, so I can make a third one which can work as a master. So if I send from the right hand outlet of there into the left hand inlets of both of those, and I could then shrink them because we're not actually going to use them. There we go. And then we've just got a master volume control so we'll deal with both of those. I said we might want to put in some starting values, so I'll do that. I don't think I shall subject you to my messing about with that, but I will come back to this whole patch shortly when it's a little bit neater. Okay, just to show you what I've done in terms of neatening up the patch, I've made it neater for the purposes of being able to kind of just to show you how I've neatened up the patch, just to make it a little bit more legible for debugging and so on. I've I've actually separated out the waveform display from the grain position, because I'll be able to put those together in the presentation mode, and because just in terms of patching it makes more sense to have it separated from that, all of that over there. Actually, I could neaten that up a little bit just by aligning it. And then you've got your grain length and your grain transposition and your grain envelope all over here. I could probably make it neater by putting some panels underneath or something to differentiate those in terms of their functions and so on. Always try to make sure that your patches are are very easy to read, not just, you know, if you're handing it in for marking or whatever, but if you're looking to come back to it in a few weeks, months, years time, it'll make it a lot easier if you have labelled your patches. I'm sure I've said that before. And then over here our sort of grain engine, so those are our controls over here, but then our engine, as I talked about before, is there. So going to the presentation mode, I've actually expanded the waveform view, because it means that you have a lot more control over whereabouts within that space you are actually placing your sound. I don't know why that's clicking, probably because I've made changes to it, and the envelopes haven't. Of course it is, because I've moved all of this around a bit. So let's turn the granulation off for a minute. Now when I moved around it shouldn't. There you go, it isn't clicking anymore. This is another reason why you should always put in load bangs, which actually I haven't done yet, to make sure your patch is initialized so that you don't get unexpected things happening when you actually make it function. Otherwise, the grain length, grain transposition, envelope are just they're not terribly beautifully laid out. We might come back to that when we have a look at a couple of other things you can do to increase functionality. And then you have an on-off switch and obviously your volume there. So I just thought I'd point that lot out. But yes, I really should have put in some load bangs to initialize these various parameters before I start. Wave my magic wand and there we go. So I've put a load bang in. Our grain length should default, actually if I double click that, it should now go to our default values. Now grain length is 100 milliseconds long, grain transposition defaults to 1, and 0.1 and 0.9 are our envelope defaults, and grain interval is 100 milliseconds as well, and I've also defaulted the volume to 0 dB. So that's sorted that one out.